The scream came first, sharp, broken, tearing through the silence of the mansion like glass shattering on marble. Isadora Lima froze halfway up the main staircase, her hand gripping the wooden rail, her breath catching in her throat. She had been working at the Alzheimer'S estate for 3 weeks now, long enough to know the sounds of the house, the hum of the central air conditioning, the soft footsteps of Patricia, the head housekeeper, the distant clatter of pots in the kitchen where Maria prepared meals no one seemed to eat. But this sound was new. This sound was pain. "Helena! Helena, where are you?" The voice belonged to Mrs. Ruth Alencar, the matriarch of the house, a woman Isadora had only glimpsed in passing. 72 years old, thin as paper, with silver hair and eyes that looked past you, searching for something that no longer existed. Isadora climbed the rest of the stairs quickly, her worn sneakers silent against the thick carpet. At the top, she hesitated. The hallway stretched before her, lined with doors, each one closed. The walls were covered in oil paintings, expensive and cold. Light poured in through tall windows, but it felt sterile, empty. "Helena, please." The voice came from the left. Isadora moved toward it, her heart pounding. She shouldn't be here. This wasn't her floor. She was hired to clean the common areas, the kitchen, the bathrooms on the ground level. The second floor was off limits unless Patricia assigned her. But the desperation in that voice pulled her forward. She reached the door and pushed it open gently. The bedroom was enormous, decorated in shades of cream and gold. A 4-poster bed sat in the center, its sheets tangled. Near the window, Mrs. Ruth stood in her nightgown, barefoot, trembling. She was staring at the glass, her palms pressed against it, her breath fogging the surface. "Ma'am," Isadora said softly. The older woman didn't turn. "She left me," Ruth whispered. She promised she wouldn't leave, but she did. Isadora stepped closer, careful, the way you approach a wounded animal. "It's okay," she said gently. "You're safe. Let me help you back to bed." Ruth turned then, and her eyes were wild, wet with tears. "Who are you?" "I'm Isadora. I work here. Where's Helena?" Isadora didn't know who Helena was. She didn't know what to say, so instead, she did the only thing that felt right. She began to sing, softly at first, almost a whisper. A lullaby her mother used to hum when Isadora was small, when the nights in their cramped apartment felt too long and too dark. The melody was simple, old, carried on breath more than voice. Ruth's body stilled. Her eyes stopped darting. She blinked once, twice, and her shoulders sagged. Isadora kept singing, stepping closer now, reaching out with one hand. Ruth took it. Her grip was weak, fragile, but steady. Isadora guided her back to the bed, still humming, and helped her lie down. She pulled the blanket over the older woman's frail body, smoothing the fabric with care. By the time the song ended, Ruth's eyes had closed. Her breathing deepened. She was asleep. Isadora stood there for a moment, watching her, feeling the weight of something she didn't understand pressing against her chest. Then she heard the voice behind her. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" She turned quickly. A man stood in the doorway, tall, lean, dressed in a gray suit that probably cost more than Isadora made in 6 months. His dark hair was neatly combed back, his jaw sharp, his eyes colder than the marble floors downstairs. Edward Alencar. She had seen him once before, from a distance, stepping out of a black car with his phone pressed to his ear, not looking at anyone. Now he was looking directly at her, and he was furious. "I asked you a question," he said, his voice low and precise. "Who authorized you to be in this room?" Isadora's throat went dry. She was upset, she managed. "I heard her calling out, and I—" "You what? Decided to play nurse? To touch my mother without permission? I was just trying to help." "Help?" He took a step forward, his eyes narrowing. "You're a housekeeper. Your job is to clean floors, not interfere with my mother's care." Isadora felt heat rising in her face, a mix of shame and anger. She was scared, she said quietly. She needed someone. She has someone. She has a full-time caregiver, a medical team, and me. She doesn't need a stranger singing her to sleep like a child. The words landed like a slap. Isadora looked down at her hands, still trembling slightly. Edward crossed his arms. "Go back downstairs. And don't come up here again." She nodded, swallowing hard, and moved toward the door. As she passed him, he spoke again. "If you ever overstep like this again, you're fired." She didn't respond. She walked down the hallway, down the stairs, back to the utility closet where her cart waited. Her hands shook as she picked up the mop. She told herself it didn't matter. She told herself she was used to this. People like Edward Alencar didn't see people like her. They never did. But as she wiped down the bathroom mirrors an hour later, she couldn't stop thinking about Mrs. Ruth's face. The way she had looked at her, as if recognizing something, someone, from a time long buried. And she couldn't stop thinking about the way Edward had looked at her, not like she was invisible, but like she was dangerous. The next morning, Isadora arrived at 6:30, the same as always. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, and the air was cool, tinged with the smell of jasmine from the garden. She entered through the back door, signed in on the staff log, and changed into her uniform in the small locker room near the kitchen. Maria was already there, chopping vegetables with quick, practiced movements. "Morning," Isadora said. Maria glanced up, her expression tight. "Patricia wants to see you." Isadora's stomach dropped. "Now?" "Now." She found Patricia in the staff office, a small room off the main kitchen. The older woman was seated behind a desk, her reading glasses perched on her nose, a clipboard in her hands. Patricia had worked for the Alencars for over 20 years. She was firm, efficient, and rarely smiled. "Sit," she said, without looking up. Isadora sat. Patricia set down the clipboard and removed her glasses, folding them carefully. "Mr. Alencar called me last night." Isadora said nothing. "He told me you were in Mrs. Ruth's room, alone." "I heard her crying," Isadora said quickly. "I didn't mean to." Patricia held up a hand. "I don't need excuses. I need you to understand the rules. The second floor is not your responsibility. Mrs. Ruth has a caregiver, Nurse Diane, who is trained to handle her condition. You are not." "I know, but—" "There is no but, Isadora. Mr. Alencar is not a forgiving man. If you want to keep this job, you follow the rules. Do you understand?" Isadora nodded slowly. "Good. Now go. You're assigned to the East Wing today." Isadora stood and left the office, her chest tight with frustration. She spent the morning scrubbing floors, wiping down banisters, polishing mirrors. The mansion was beautiful, but it felt hollow. Every room was pristine, untouched, as if no one actually lived there. Around noon, she took her lunch break in the small courtyard behind the kitchen. It was the only place the staff were allowed to sit outside. She unwrapped the sandwich she'd brought from home and ate in silence, watching the birds hop along the stone path. She thought about Lucas and Marina, her younger siblings, still asleep back in the apartment they shared in East LA. Lucas was 17 now, about to start his senior year. Marina was 12, full of energy and questions Isadora never had time to answer properly. She sent most of her paycheck home to cover rent, groceries, school supplies. Her dream of finishing nursing school had been on hold for 3 years now, but she told herself it was temporary. She told herself it would be worth it. She was almost done with her sandwich when she heard voices nearby. Male voices, low and sharp. She stood and moved toward the hedge that separated the courtyard from the side terrace. Through the leaves, she could see Edward standing with another man, older, graying at the temples, dressed in a suit. "The board is getting impatient, Edward," the man was saying. "They need to see results, not delays." "I'm handling it," Edward replied coldly. "Your mother's condition is affecting your judgment. You need to make a decision about the foundation. My mother's condition is none of the board's concern. It is when it's costing the company time and focus. You can't keep doing this alone." Edward turned sharply. "Then maybe the board should find someone else to run the company." The older man sighed. "That's not what I'm saying." "Isn't it?" There was a long silence. Then the older man left. Edward stood alone on the terrace, his hands in his pockets, his shoulders tense. Isadora stayed hidden, watching. For a moment he looked almost human, almost vulnerable. Then his phone rang, and the mask returned. He answered it, his voice clipped and professional, and walked back into the house. Isadora returned to her seat, her appetite gone. She didn't know why, but something about that moment stayed with her. The way he had looked when he thought no one was watching. The way he had let the armor slip, just for a second. That evening, Isadora was finishing her shift when Patricia found her again. "Mrs. Ruth is asking for you." Isadora blinked. "What?" "She's been agitated all day. Nurse Diane tried everything, but she keeps repeating the same thing. The girl who sings. Mr. Alencar is upstairs now. He wants you to come." Isadora's heart raced. "I don't understand." "Neither do I. But go, now." She climbed the stairs slowly, her mind spinning. When she reached Mrs. Ruth's room, the door was already open. Inside, Edward stood near the bed, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Nurse Diane, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and tired hands, stood beside him. And in the bed, Mrs. Ruth sat upright, staring at the door. When she saw Isadora, her face lit up. "You," she whispered. Isadora stepped inside cautiously. "Hello, Mrs. Ruth." The older woman reached out a trembling hand. "Sing," she said. "Please." Edward's jaw tightened. Isadora looked at him, uncertain. He said nothing. She took a step closer, then another, until she was standing beside the bed. She took Mrs. Ruth's hand gently, and she began to sing. The same lullaby as before, soft and steady, wrapping around the room like a blanket. Mrs. Ruth's eyes closed. Her breathing slowed. Within minutes, she was asleep. Isadora stopped singing and looked up. Edward was staring at her, his expression unreadable. "How did you do that?" he asked quietly. "I don't know," she admitted. "It's just a song my mother used to sing." He studied her for a long moment. Then he turned and left the room without another word. Nurse Diane exhaled slowly. "That's the first time she's calmed down all day," she said. "Thank you." Isadora nodded, still holding Mrs. Ruth's hand. She didn't know what had just happened, but she knew something had shifted, and it terrified her. Over the following days, the routine changed. Patricia began assigning Isadora to tasks that kept her on the second floor, dusting the hallway, organizing the linen closet, polishing the wood trim near Mrs. Ruth's room. It wasn't explicitly stated, but the message was clear. Stay close. Mrs. Ruth didn't ask for her every day, but when she did, Isadora came. She would sit beside the bed, hold the older woman's hand, and sing. Sometimes Mrs. Ruth would talk, her words fractured and strange, jumping between decades. "Helena loved the garden," she would say. "She planted roses, pink ones." Or, "Jonathan used to play the piano. Every Sunday morning, the whole house would listen." Isadora didn't interrupt. She just listened, nodded and sang when the memories became too heavy. Edward rarely spoke to her, but she felt his presence constantly. He would appear in doorways, silent and watching. He would pass her in the hallway without acknowledgement, but she could feel his eyes following her. One afternoon, she overheard him speaking to Nurse Diane in the study. "I want to know everything about that song," he was saying. "Where it comes from, why it works." "It's just a lullaby, Mr. Alencar," Diane replied gently. "There's no science to it. Your mother responds to her presence, to her voice. That's all. There has to be more. Sometimes the heart remembers what the mind forgets." Edward didn't respond. Isadora moved away before she could hear more, her pulse quickening. She didn't want to be part of whatever puzzle he was trying to solve. She didn't want to be noticed, but it was too late for that. 3 weeks after the first night, Isadora was cleaning the downstairs library when Patricia found her again. "Mr. Alencar wants to see you." "In his office." Isadora's hands went cold. "Did I do something wrong?" Patricia's expression softened, just slightly. "I don't think so, but be careful." Edward's office was on the first floor, near the back of the house. Isadora had never been inside. She knocked twice. "Come in." She pushed the door open. The office was large, lined with bookshelves, a heavy desk in the center. Papers were stacked neatly, a laptop open, a crystal glass of water beside it. Edward sat behind the desk, his hands folded. "Close the door," he said. She did, her heart hammering. "Sit." She sat in the chair across from him, her back straight, her hands in her lap. Edward studied her for a long moment, his gaze sharp and assessing. "How old are you?" he asked. 27. "How long have you worked here?" "Almost 2 months." He nodded slowly. "Patricia tells me you're studying to be a nurse." Isadora blinked. "I was. I had to put it on hold." "Why?" "Because I need to work." To support yourself? To support my family. He leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. My mother has Alzheimer's, he said. Advanced stage. She doesn't recognize me most days. She doesn't remember my father, or her friends, or the life she built. But she remembers you. Isadora didn't know what to say. I need to understand why, he continued. I've hired the best doctors, the best therapists. Nothing works. But you walk into a room and sing, and she's calm. Explain that to me. I can't, Isadora said honestly. I don't know why. Then guess. She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. Maybe it's not about me. Maybe it's about the song, or the feeling. Something familiar. Edward's jaw tightened. My mother doesn't remember anything familiar. Then maybe it's something deeper, Isadora said quietly. Something she can't put into words. He stared at her, his eyes dark and intense. Then he stood, walking to the window. You're not like the others, he said, his back to her. I'm just trying to do my job. No, you're doing more than that. And I don't know if I should be grateful or suspicious. Isadora's chest tightened. I'm not trying to manipulate anyone, Mr. Alencar. I just want to help. He turned, his expression hard. People like you always say that. The words hit her like a slap. She stood, her voice steady, despite the anger rising in her throat. People like me. People who think kindness is currency, he said coldly. People who see an opportunity and take it. Isadora's hands curled into fists at her sides. I don't want anything from you, she said. I don't want your money or your recognition. I just want to do my job and go home. That's it. Then why are you still here? Because your mother asked me to stay. The silence stretched between them, heavy and sharp. Edward's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes, something almost like guilt. You can go, he said finally. Isadora turned and left the office, her legs shaking. She didn't cry until she reached the locker room. Then she let the tears come, hot and angry, as she changed out of her uniform and stuffed it into her bag. She wanted to quit. She wanted to walk out and never come back. But she thought of Lucas, of Marina, of the rent due next week, and she stayed. That night she couldn't sleep. She lay in her small bed, staring at the ceiling of the apartment she shared with her siblings, listening to the distant hum of traffic outside. Lucas was in the next room, probably still awake, studying for his SATs. Marina was asleep on the couch, her stuffed rabbit tucked under her arm. Isadora thought about Mrs. Ruth, about the way her eyes had lit up when she sang. She thought about Edward, about the coldness in his voice, the way he looked at her like she was a threat. And she thought about her mother, who had died when Isadora was 19, leaving her alone with 2 children to raise. Her mother used to sing that lullaby too. She used to say it had been passed down through generations, from her grandmother, from her great-grandmother before that, a song of comfort, of survival. Isadora closed her eyes and let the melody play in her mind. Somewhere, in a mansion across the city, she imagined Mrs. Ruth doing the same. And maybe, just maybe, Edward was listening too. The following week, everything changed. Isadora was in the kitchen, helping Maria prepare tea for the afternoon staff break, when she heard shouting upstairs. Edward's voice, loud and sharp. Then a crash. Maria froze, her hands stilling over the teapot. Stay here, she said, but Isadora was already moving. She ran up the stairs, her heart pounding, and found Edward in the hallway outside his mother's room. His face was pale, his hands shaking. Nurse Diane stood in the doorway, her expression stricken. What happened? Isadora asked. Edward turned to her, his eyes wild. She's gone. What? She's not breathing. I came to check on her and she... His voice broke. She's not breathing. Isadora pushed past him into the room. Mrs. Ruth lay in the bed, her eyes closed, her chest still. Diane was beside her, checking her pulse, her expression grave. Call 911, Isadora said sharply. I already did, Diane replied. They're on their way. Isadora moved to the other side of the bed, her training kicking in automatically. She tilted Mrs. Ruth's head back, checked her airway, and began chest compressions. What are you doing? Edward demanded. CPR, Isadora said without stopping. Count for me. 30 compressions, then 2 breaths. Now. He hesitated, then began counting, his voice shaking. Isadora worked quickly, efficiently, her hands moving with precision. She had practiced this 1,000 times in school, but never like this. Never with someone who mattered. After 2 minutes, Mrs. Ruth gasped. Her eyes fluttered open. Isadora stopped, her hands trembling, and checked her pulse. It was weak but steady. "She's back," she whispered. Edward dropped to his knees beside the bed, his face in his hands. The paramedics arrived minutes later, taking over with professional calm. They stabilized Mrs. Ruth and loaded her onto a stretcher, preparing to transport her to the hospital. Edward followed them out, his face blank with shock. Before he left, he turned back to Isadora. "Thank you," he said quietly. Then he was gone. Isadora stood alone in the empty room, her hands still shaking, her heart still racing. She had saved a life today, but she didn't feel victorious. She just felt tired. Mrs. Ruth survived the episode, but her condition worsened rapidly after that. She was moved to a private room in one of the Alenkar hospitals, where she received round-the-clock care. Isadora wasn't asked to visit, and she didn't expect to be. She returned to her regular duties at the mansion, scrubbing floors and wiping counters, invisible once more. But something had shifted in the house. Edward was different. He no longer avoided her in the hallways. He nodded when they passed, a small acknowledgement. Once he even said good morning. Patricia noticed too. "Whatever you did," she told Isadora one afternoon, "it worked. He's less of a nightmare these days." Isadora didn't respond. She didn't want credit. She just wanted to survive. 2 weeks later, she received a message. Patricia handed her a sealed envelope during her lunch break. "From Mr. Alenkar," she said. Isadora opened it carefully. Inside was a handwritten note on expensive stationery. "Isadora, my mother passed away last night, peacefully in her sleep. There will be a private service on Saturday. I would like you to attend. Edward Alenkar." Isadora read the note 3 times, her chest tightening. She didn't know why he wanted her there, but she knew she would go. The funeral was held in the Alenkar family chapel, a small, elegant building on the estate grounds. Isadora arrived early, dressed in the only black dress she owned, her hair pulled back in a simple bun. She sat in the back row, her hands folded in her lap. The service was brief, attended by a small group of family friends and business associates. Edward stood at the front, his face expressionless, his shoulders rigid. He spoke about his mother's life, her charity work, her love of music and gardening. His voice was steady, controlled, but Isadora could see the cracks beneath the surface. After the service, people gathered outside, speaking in low voices, offering condolences. Isadora stayed inside, sitting alone in the empty chapel. She heard footsteps behind her. Edward sat down in the pew beside her. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "She wrote this," he said quietly, "a few weeks ago, during one of her lucid moments. I found it in her nightstand after she died." He handed it to Isadora. She unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was shaky but legible. "To my son, the girl who sings is the sound of what you forgot to feel. Don't let her go. Your mother." Isadora's throat tightened. "I don't understand," Edward said, his voice breaking slightly. "She barely knew you. Why would she write this?" Isadora folded the paper and handed it back to him. "Maybe she saw something you didn't," she said softly. "What?" "That kindness doesn't need a reason." Edward looked at her, really looked at her for the first time, and in his eyes she saw something she hadn't expected. "Regret. I was cruel to you," he said. "Yes," Isadora agreed. "You were. I'm sorry." The words hung in the air between them, fragile and unexpected. Isadora didn't respond right away. She thought about the humiliation, the anger, the nights she had cried in frustration. But she also thought about Mrs. Ruth, about the way she had held her hand and smiled. "Your mother was kind," Isadora said finally. "She deserved better than what this disease took from her. I'm glad I could give her a little peace at the end." Edward nodded slowly. "So am I." They sat in silence for a while longer. Then Isadora stood. "I should go." "Wait," Edward said, standing as well. "I want to offer you something. I don't want your money. It's not money. It's a job. At the foundation, we run programs for underserved communities, scholarships, medical outreach. I want you to help lead one of the initiatives." Isadora shook her head. "I appreciate the offer, but I need to finish my degree first, on my own terms." Edward studied her, a small, sad smile crossing his face. "You're stubborn." "I have to be." He nodded. "Then good luck, Isadora Lima. I hope you get everything you're working for." "Thank you." She turned and walked out of the chapel into the bright afternoon sun, and she didn't look back. 6 months passed like pages turning in a book Isadora barely had time to read. She quit the Alencar mansion 2 weeks after the funeral, not out of anger or spite, but because she needed something more. She took a night shift at a 24-hour diner in downtown LA, waiting tables and serving coffee to truck drivers, nurses finishing their shifts, and insomniacs searching for something warm. The pay wasn't much better, but the tips helped, and the schedule allowed her to return to school. She re-enrolled in her nursing program, taking evening classes 3 nights a week. It was exhausting. Most days she barely slept 4 hours. She would come home at 7 in the morning, wake Lucas and Marina, make them breakfast, get Marina ready for school, then collapse into bed for a few hours before her first class at 2 in the afternoon. Lucas noticed. "You're going to kill yourself," he said one morning, watching her pour coffee with shaking hands. "I'm fine," she replied. "You're not." She looked at him then, really looked at him. He was taller now, almost 6 feet, with their mother's eyes and her stubborn jaw. He was going to be something. She could feel it. "I'm doing this for you," she said quietly. "For Marina, for all of us. We don't need you to destroy yourself for us." "Yes, you do." He didn't argue after that, but she saw the worry in his eyes. Marina was easier. She still believed in fairy tales, in happy endings, in the idea that hard work always paid off. She would sit at the kitchen table after school, coloring in her notebooks, humming songs she'd learned in class. Sometimes she would ask Isadora to sing, and Isadora would, even when her voice felt tired, even when the words caught in her throat, because that was what mothers did, and Isadora had been more mother than sister for years now. One evening, 3 months into the new routine, Isadora was at the diner when a familiar face walked in. She was wiping down a table near the window when she looked up and saw him. Edward Alencar. He stood near the entrance, scanning the room, his hands in the pockets of his coat. When his eyes landed on her, he stopped. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then he walked over, slowly, deliberately. "Hi," he said. "Hi," Isadora replied, her heart pounding. "I didn't know you worked here. I didn't know you came here." He smiled slightly. "I don't. Usually. I was driving and I saw the sign. I thought I'd stop for coffee." She gestured to an empty booth near the back. "Sit wherever you want." He chose the booth, sliding into the seat, and Isadora followed with her notepad. "Coffee?" she asked. "Please, black." She poured him a cup from the pot she was carrying and set it down in front of him. "Anything else?" "Actually," he said, looking up at her, "I was hoping we could talk." Isadora glanced around the diner. It was quiet, only 2 other customers, both absorbed in their phones. "I'm working," she said. "I know, but when you have a moment." She hesitated, then nodded. "Give me 10 minutes." She finished her rounds, topped off the other customers' drinks, then grabbed her own cup of coffee and slid into the booth across from Edward. He looked different, tired maybe, or softer. It was hard to tell. "How have you been?" he asked. "Busy," she said. "You?" "The same." They sat in silence for a moment, the hum of the diner filling the space between them. "I looked into your background," Edward said finally. Isadora's spine stiffened. "Excuse me?" "Not in a creepy way," he added quickly. "I was curious. After the funeral, I started thinking about what my mother wrote. About you. I wanted to understand." "Understand what?" "How you learned that song." Isadora frowned. "My mother taught it to me. I told you that." "I know, but I kept thinking about it. So I went through my mother's old records, her charity work, the program she funded." He pulled out a folder from his bag and set it on the table. Inside were photographs, documents, letters. 20 years ago, Edward continued, "My mother started a literacy program in East LA. She volunteered there every Saturday for 3 years, teaching kids to read and sing. She believed music helped with memory. He slid one of the photographs across the table. Isadora picked it up. It was old, slightly faded, but the image was clear. A group of children sitting in a circle, smiling. And in the center, Mrs. Ruth, younger, vibrant, holding a book. Isadora's breath caught. "That's you," Edward said, pointing to a small girl in the front row. "You were 7. Isadora stared at the photograph, her hands trembling. She remembered that room. She remembered the smell of books, the sound of laughter, the feeling of safety. And she remembered the kind woman who had taught her to read, who had sung with her, who had made her feel like she mattered. "I didn't know," Isadora whispered. "Neither did I," Edward said. "My mother never told me, but I found her journal. She wrote about the program, about the kids, and she wrote about you. She said you had the most beautiful voice she'd ever heard in a child." Tears welled in Isadora's eyes. "She saved my life," she said quietly. "That program. It was the only place I felt safe. My mom was working 3 jobs, and I was alone most of the time. But on Saturdays, I had somewhere to go. Someone who cared." Edward nodded slowly. "She loved that program. She talked about it all the time. She said it was the most important work she'd ever done." "She was right," Isadora said, wiping her eyes. "It was." They sat in silence again, but this time it felt different, less heavy. "I'm sorry," Edward said. "For what?" "For not seeing it sooner. For treating you like you were trying to take advantage. You weren't. You were just being who she taught you to be." Isadora looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something she hadn't seen before. Humanity. "Thank you," she said. He nodded. "I meant what I said at the funeral, about the job, if you ever change your mind." "I won't," Isadora said gently, "but I appreciate it." He smiled. "I figured as much." He stood, leaving a $20 bill on the table. "That's too much," Isadora said. "It's a tip," he replied, "for the coffee and the conversation." He turned to leave, then stopped. "Isadora?" "Yeah?" "Keep singing. The world needs more of that." And then he was gone. Isadora sat alone in the booth, staring at the photograph, feeling the weight of everything she had never known pressing against her chest. Mrs. Ruth hadn't just been a dying woman she had comforted. She had been the person who had given her hope when she had none. And now, all these years later, Isadora had returned the favor without even knowing it. She folded the photograph carefully and tucked it into her apron. Then she got back to work. The months continued to blur together. Isadora graduated from nursing school in the spring, on a warm May afternoon that smelled like possibility. Lucas and Marina came to the ceremony, sitting in the crowded auditorium, cheering louder than anyone else when her name was called. She walked across the stage in her cap and gown, shaking hands with the dean, accepting her diploma. And for the first time in years, she felt like she could breathe. Lucas hugged her afterward, lifting her off her feet. "I'm so proud of you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Marina clung to her waist, beaming. "You're a real nurse now." "Not yet," Isadora laughed. "I still have to pass the licensing exam." "You will," Lucas said confidently. "You always do." They went out for dinner that night, a small Mexican restaurant near their apartment. It wasn't fancy, but it was theirs. They ordered too much food, laughed too loud, and stayed until the waitress gently reminded them they were closing. As they walked home through the warm night, Marina skipping ahead, Lucas put his arm around Isadora's shoulders. "Mom would be proud," he said quietly. Isadora's throat tightened. "I hope so. I know so." She looked at him, this boy who had become a man while she wasn't paying attention. "You got into UCLA," she said. "Full ride. You're going to change the world, Lucas." "Maybe," he said, "but you already did." Isadora passed her licensing exam on the first try. Within 2 weeks, she had 3 job offers. She chose the position at Mercy General, a large hospital in downtown Los Angeles. The pay was decent, the benefits were good, and the geriatric ward needed staff. She started in June. Her first day was overwhelming. The ward was busy, filled with elderly patients in various stages of decline. Some were recovering from surgery, others were waiting to die. Isadora moved between rooms, checking vitals, administering medication, offering comfort. She met Mrs. Chen, who had outlived 3 husbands and still flirted with the male nurses. She met Mr. Davis, a veteran who couldn't remember his children's names but could recite every word of the Pledge of Allegiance. She met Mrs. Thompson, who thought Isadora was her daughter and cried every time she left the room. And she met the Alzheimer's patients, the ones who wandered the halls at night, searching for something they couldn't name, the ones who screamed at shadows, the ones who forgot to eat, to speak, to exist. Isadora sang to them, not every day, but when it felt right. When Mrs. Rodriguez couldn't sleep, thrashing in her bed, calling for her mother. When Mr. Kim stood by the window at dawn, weeping silently. When the night shift felt too long and too dark, she would sing softly, the old lullaby her mother had taught her, the one Mrs. Ruth had recognized all those months ago. And slowly, gently, the patients would calm. The other nurses noticed. "You have a gift," one of them said. Isadora shrugged. "It's just a song." "It's more than that." Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. Isadora didn't think about it too much. She just did her job. 3 months into her position, Isadora was working a night shift when she saw the announcement. It was posted in the staff break room, printed on expensive paper, the Alankar Foundation logo at the top. New Memory Care Wing, grand opening. The Songs of Memory Initiative, a program dedicated to integrating music therapy into Alzheimer's treatment. Opening ceremony, Saturday, September 14th. Isadora stared at the flyer, her heart beating faster. She thought about Mrs. Ruth, about Edward, about the photograph she still kept in her wallet. She didn't plan to go. But when Saturday came, she found herself standing outside the hospital's new wing, dressed in her best clothes, watching the crowd gather. There were reporters, photographers, hospital administrators in suits. And at the center of it all, Edward. He stood on a small stage near the entrance, speaking into a microphone. "My mother believed that memory lives in more than just the mind," he was saying. "It lives in sound, in touch, in the connections we make with each other. This wing is dedicated to that belief, to the idea that even when everything else fades, compassion remains." The crowd applauded. Edward continued, "We're naming the main section of this wing after someone very special. Someone who showed me and my mother what true care looks like." Isadora's breath caught. The Isadora Project honors a nurse who embodies everything this initiative stands for. Empathy, resilience, the healing power of presence. He gestured to a large plaque mounted on the wall beside him. The Isadora Project, in honor of compassion, resilience, and the healing power of song. Isadora felt tears streaming down her face. Edward scanned the crowd and his eyes found hers. He smiled, a real smile, warm and genuine. After the ceremony, people mingled, drinking champagne, touring the new facilities. Isadora stayed back, standing near the plaque, reading it over and over. "I was hoping you'd come." She turned. Edward stood beside her, holding 2 glasses of champagne. He offered her one. She took it. "I didn't know," she said. "I wanted it to be a surprise." "It is." They stood in silence, looking at the plaque. "You didn't have to do this," Isadora said. "Yes, I did. You changed everything for my mother, and for me. I was just doing my job." "No," Edward said firmly. "You were being yourself, and that made all the difference." Isadora looked at him. "Your mother was a good person. She helped me when I was a kid. I didn't even remember until you showed me that photograph. But she planted something in me. Hope, I think. Or maybe just the belief that I mattered." "You do matter," Edward said quietly. So did she. They stood together, 2 people connected by grief and gratitude, by a woman who had loved them both in different ways. "Will you be part of it?" Edward asked. "The program?" "I already am," Isadora said. "I work here, on the geriatric ward. I see the patients every day." Edward's eyes widened slightly. "I didn't know. Why would you?" He laughed softly. "Of course you're already doing the work. That's exactly who you are. I'm just a nurse. You're more than that. You always have been." Isadora sipped her champagne, feeling the warmth spread through her chest. "Thank you," she said, "for this, for remembering her, for remembering me. Thank you for giving my mother peace, and for teaching me how to feel again." They raised their glasses and drank. Around them, the hospital buzzed with life and hope and the promise of healing. And in that moment, Isadora felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: complete. The weeks turned into months, and the months into a year. Lucas started at UCLA, majoring in engineering, already making plans to change the world. Marina thrived in middle school, her laughter still filling their apartment every evening. Isadora continued working at Mercy General, building relationships with her patients, singing when they needed her, holding hands when words weren't enough. The Isadora Project grew. Music therapists joined the staff, working with Alzheimer's patients, teaching families how to connect through song and sound. The results were remarkable. Patients who hadn't spoken in months began humming. Families who had lost hope found small moments of recognition. And slowly, the culture of care began to shift. Edward visited occasionally, checking on the program, meeting with staff. He and Isadora became something like friends. Not close, but connected. Two people who understood each other's pain and respected each other's strength. One afternoon, he found her in the break room, eating a sandwich during her lunch break. "Can I join you?" he asked. "Sure." He sat across from her, setting down a folder. "I wanted to show you something." He opened the folder and pulled out several documents. "We're expanding the program, 3 more hospitals across California, and we're creating a scholarship fund for nursing students who want to specialize in memory care." Isadora's eyes widened. "That's incredible. It's because of you. All of it. Your work inspired this. The way you care for people, the way you make them feel seen. That's what we're trying to replicate." "You can't replicate compassion," Isadora said gently. "You can only teach people to find it in themselves." Edward smiled. "Then that's what we'll do." He slid a paper across the table. "I want you to be part of the leadership team, help design the training program, teach other nurses what you do." Isadora looked at the document. It was a job offer, a significant pay increase, a leadership position, the chance to shape something bigger than herself. She thought about it, about Lucas and Marina, about the apartment that was finally starting to feel less cramped, about the patients who needed her, who knew her voice, who waited for her at the end of long shifts. "Can I think about it?" she asked. "Of course, take your time." She folded the paper and tucked it into her bag. "Thank you, Edward, for seeing me, for believing in me. You made it impossible not to." That night, Isadora sat at the kitchen table, the job offer in front of her. Lucas was studying in his room, and Marina was asleep on the couch, her homework scattered around her. Isadora thought about everything that had brought her here: her mother's death, the years of struggle, the mansion, Mrs. Ruth, the song. She thought about the little girl in that photograph, sitting in a circle of other children, learning to read, learning that she mattered. And she thought about the woman she had become: a nurse, a caregiver, a sister, a survivor. She picked up her phone and called Edward. He answered on the second ring. "Hello?" "I'll do it," Isadora said. "I'll join the leadership team, but on one condition." "Name it." "I still work with patients. I don't want to be stuck in meetings all day. I need to be on the floor with people who need me." Edward laughed softly. "I wouldn't have it any other way." "Then we have a deal. Welcome to the team, Isadora." She hung up and looked around the small apartment. It wasn't much, but it was hers, and it was enough. 2 years later, Isadora stood in a conference room at Mercy General, leading a training session for new nurses. She was confident now, comfortable in her role. She taught them about memory care, about compassion, about the small gestures that made all the difference. And at the end of each session, she sang the same lullaby her mother had taught her, the one Mrs. Ruth had remembered, the one that had changed everything. The nurses listened, some with tears in their eyes. "Music is memory," Isadora told them, "and memory is love. When you care for someone who's losing themselves, you become their anchor. You remind them that they're still here, that they still matter." After the session, one of the new nurses approached her. "Thank you," the young woman said. "That was beautiful." "You're welcome. Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why do you do this? It's hard work, emotionally draining. Why choose this?" Isadora thought about the question. She thought about Mrs. Ruth, about Edward, about her mother, about all the people who had shaped her into who she was. "Because someone once chose me," she said simply, "and I want to pass that on." The nurse nodded, understanding. Isadora left the conference room and walked through the hospital, greeting patients, checking in with staff. She stopped by Mrs. Rodriguez's room, where the elderly woman was sitting by the window. "Hello, Mrs. Rodriguez." The woman turned and smiled. "Oh, the singing girl. I was hoping you'd come." Isadora sat beside her and took her hand. "Would you like me to sing?" "Please," Isadora began, her voice soft and steady, filling the room with warmth. Mrs. Rodriguez closed her eyes, swaying gently, and in that moment, nothing else mattered. Not the struggles of the past, not the uncertainties of the future, just this. Two people, connected by compassion, by presence, by song. When Isadora finished, Mrs. Rodriguez squeezed her hand. "Thank you, mija. You have a gift." "We all do," Isadora said. "We just have to remember to use it." She left the room and continued her rounds, her heart full. This was her life now. Not perfect, but purposeful. Not easy, but meaningful. And as she walked through the halls of Mercy General, passing the plaque that bore her name, she thought about Mrs. Ruth, about the woman who had given her hope all those years ago, about the woman she had given peace to at the end. And she smiled, because the circle was complete. The song had come full circle. And Isadora Lima, the girl from East LA who had once felt invisible, had become the light that guided others home.